What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show, set expecting a normal interview, only to find himself face to face with a host who seems more interested in pushing her own agenda than having an actual conversation? What happens when that host decides to take cheap shots at everything the guest stands for, thinking she can bully him into submission? And what happens when that guest is Samuel L. Jackson, a man who has never backed down from anyone in his entire career? Well, you're about to find out exactly what happens, and trust me, this is one television moment that nobody saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below letting me know what you think about this whole situation. The morning started like any other at the View studio. Samuel L. Jackson had arrived early, as he always did for television appearances. He was there to promote his latest film project, a passion project that had taken him years to get off the ground. The veteran actor sat in the guest chair, adjusting his jacket and mentally preparing for what he assumed would be a straightforward interview about his career and new movie. Joy Behar walked onto the set with her usual confident stride, but there was something different in her demeanor that morning. Maybe it was the way she shuffled her note cards a little too aggressively, or the way she barely acknowledged Jackson when she sat down across from him. The cameras weren't rolling yet, but the tension was already building. "So, Samuel," Joy began, not bothering with pleasantries once they went live, "I have to ask you about some of the roles you've taken over the years. Don't you think it's a bit problematic that you've made a career out of playing these angry black characters? I mean, isn't that just reinforcing stereotypes?" Jackson's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the first question he had expected, and it certainly wasn't the tone he was prepared for. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice measured but with an edge that anyone familiar with his work would recognize immediately. "Well, I'm just saying," Joy continued, leaning back in her chair with a smug expression, "you're always playing these tough guys, these characters who are quick to anger, quick to violence. Don't you think that sends the wrong message to young people?" "First of all," Jackson replied, his voice growing stronger, "you clearly haven't done your homework if you think that's all I've ever played. Second, are you seriously sitting here questioning my choice of roles when you've spent your entire career making jokes at other people's expense?" Joy's eyes narrowed. "I'm just asking legitimate questions here, Samuel. You don't need to get defensive." "Defensive?" Jackson's voice rose slightly. "Lady, you just accused me of reinforcing stereotypes without even bothering to understand the depth and complexity of the characters I've portrayed. You want to talk about sending the wrong message? How about we talk about hosts who ambush their guests with loaded questions designed to create controversy, rather than have actual conversations?" The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. This was not going according to script, and Joy was clearly not expecting this level of pushback. "Look," Joy said, waving her hand dismissively, "I think you're overreacting here. I'm just trying to have an honest discussion about representation in Hollywood." "Overreacting?" Jackson's voice was incredulous now. "You come at me sideways with some half-baked critique of my 30-year career, and you want to tell me I'm overreacting? You don't know the first thing about the work I've done or the impact it's had." "I know enough," Joy shot back, her voice getting sharper. "I know that you've made millions playing into these angry black man tropes, and I think it's fair to question whether that's responsible." The studio had gone dead quiet, except for the sound of cameras continuing to roll. Even the production crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Jackson leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked on Joy's. "Let me tell you something about responsibility," he said, his voice low but carrying across the entire studio. "I've spent my entire career trying to bring dignity and complexity to every character I've played, regardless of what that character looked like on paper. I've worked with directors and writers to make sure that even when I'm playing someone who's angry, there's a reason for that anger, there's humanity behind it. But don't you see how that contributes to—" Joy began, but Jackson held up a hand. "I'm not done talking," he said firmly. "You want to question my responsibility? Let's talk about your responsibility as a host. Did you do any research before I came on here today? Did you watch any of my recent films? Did you read any interviews where I've talked about my approach to character development? Or did you just see my name on the booking sheet and decide you were going to try to score some cheap points by putting me on the defensive?" Joy's face was flushed now. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by you about how to do my job. And I don't have to sit here and let you mischaracterize my entire career, Jackson fired back. But here we are. The tension in the room was palpable. What had started as a routine interview had devolved into something much more personal, much more intense. Joy was clearly rattled, but she wasn't backing down. Fine, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Let's talk about your latest movie then. Another action film where you're running around with guns, right? More of the same? Jackson's jaw tightened. You really didn't do any research, did you? My latest film is a drama about a father dealing with loss and trying to reconnect with his estranged daughter. There are no guns, no explosions, no angry black man, anything. It's a quiet, contemplative piece about family and forgiveness. Joy blinked, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, it looked like she might apologize or change course, but instead, she doubled down. Well, regardless of this one film, she said, you can't deny that the majority of your career has been built on a certain type of character. The majority of my career, Jackson said slowly, has been built on my ability to bring truth and authenticity to whatever role I'm playing. Whether that's a action hero, a dramatic lead, a supporting character, or even a voice in an animated film. You're trying to reduce decades of work down to a single stereotype, and frankly, it's insulting. The word insulting hung in the air like a challenge. Joy's face had gone from flushed to pale, and then back to red again. She was clearly not used to guests who pushed back this hard, and it was showing. Insulting? She repeated, her voice rising to match his intensity. You know what I think is insulting? I think it's insulting that someone with your platform and influence chooses to perpetuate harmful images, instead of using that power to uplift your community. Jackson's laugh was sharp and humorless. My community? Lady, you don't know anything about my community or what I've done for it. You want to talk about using my platform? I've mentored young actors, I've funded scholarships, I've worked with organizations that provide opportunities for underrepresented voices in Hollywood. What have you done besides sit behind this desk and take shots at people? I've used this platform to ask tough questions. Joy shot back, her voice getting shriller. I've held people accountable for their choices, including celebrities who think they're above criticism. Tough questions? Jackson's eyebrows shot up. Is that what you call coming at me with some surface-level analysis that you probably got from skimming a Wikipedia page? You want to ask tough questions? Then do your homework first. Ask me about the research I did to prepare for playing a character dealing with PTSD. Ask me about the conversations I had with real veterans to make sure I got it right. Ask me about the time I spent in community centers learning about the challenges facing single fathers. Those are tough questions that might actually lead to an interesting conversation. Joy was visibly struggling now, shuffling through her cards like she might find salvation in her notes. Look, I'm just trying to understand why someone of your stature continues to take roles that what? Jackson interrupted, his patience clearly at an end. That challenge me as an actor? That tell stories worth telling? That give me opportunities to work with talented directors and writers? You keep dancing around what you really want to say, so why don't you just say it? Fine, Joy snapped, throwing her cards down on the table. I think you've built your career on being the angry black man because it's easy, because it's what Hollywood expects, and because it pays well. I think you've taken the path of least resistance instead of challenging the system. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Jackson stared at Joy for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. You think playing complex, challenging characters is the path of least resistance? He asked. You think bringing humanity and depth to roles that could have been one-dimensional stereotypes is taking the easy way out? You think the emotional and psychological work that goes into creating authentic characters is somehow less valuable than whatever it is you think I should have been doing instead? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Jackson wasn't finished. Let me tell you about the path of least resistance, he continued. The path of least resistance would have been to turn down roles that challenged audiences' expectations. The path of least resistance would have been to stick to safe, comfortable characters that didn't make people think or feel anything complicated. The path of least resistance would have been to avoid working with directors who pushed me to go deeper, to find truth in difficult situations. But that's not what you did though, is it? Joy said, trying to regain control of the conversation. You took the roles that played into existing stereotypes. You're not listening, Jackson said, his frustration evident. You're so committed to your narrative that you're completely ignoring what I'm trying to tell you. Yes, I've played characters who were angry. Do you know why they were angry? Because they had every right to be. Because the stories demanded that anger. Because real people in those situations would be angry, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Joy leaned forward aggressively. So you're saying that anger is the appropriate response? That violence is justified? Joe. I'm saying that complex human beings have complex emotions, Jackson replied. I'm saying that reducing someone's anger to a stereotype ignores the very real circumstances that might cause that anger. I'm saying that dismissing those emotions as problematic without understanding their context is exactly the kind of shallow thinking that keeps real issues from being addressed. So now I'm shallow? Joy's voice was getting louder, more defensive. Your analysis of my work? Yeah, it's incredibly shallow, Jackson said without hesitation. You've taken 30 years of carefully crafted performances and reduced them to a single talking point that you probably heard someone else make. You haven't engaged with the actual content. You haven't considered the artistic choices. You haven't thought about the impact these stories have had on audiences. Joy was clearly losing her composure now. I don't need to be an expert in your filmography to point out obvious patterns. But you do need to be accurate, Jackson countered. You do need to be fair. You do need to actually understand what you're criticizing before you level accusations. And you've failed on all 3 counts. The other hosts were looking back and forth between Joy and Jackson, like they were watching a tennis match, but none of them seemed willing to intervene. This had gone far beyond what anyone had prepared for. You know what? Joy said, her voice tight with anger. I think this conversation proves my point perfectly. You're sitting here getting angry and aggressive, just like in your movies. Jackson's expression shifted to something that was almost amusement, but not quite. There it is, he said quietly. There's the real Joy Behar. When your argument falls apart, when you can't defend your position, you resort to personal attacks. You try to make the conversation about me being angry, instead of addressing the fact that you came completely unprepared for this interview. I'm not making personal attacks, Joy protested. You just accused me of proving your point by being angry and aggressive, Jackson pointed out. That's not engaging with my arguments. That's trying to dismiss them by attacking my character. It's exactly what people do when they know they're wrong but are too proud to admit it. Joy's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. I'm trying to have a serious conversation about representation in media. No, you're not, Jackson said firmly. You're trying to score points by taking shots at someone you thought would be an easy target. You came in here with a predetermined narrative and you're upset that I'm not playing along with your script. My script? Joy's voice was incredulous. Your script where I'm supposed to sit here quietly while you lecture me about my career choices, Jackson explained. Your script where I'm supposed to nod along while you reduce decades of work to convenient talking points. Your script where you get to be the enlightened host, educating the misguided celebrity. Joy was practically vibrating with anger now. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Jackson asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you invited me here under false pretenses, so you could ambush me with criticism that you're not qualified to make. Joy's silence stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Finally, she found her voice, but it was strained and defensive. I invited you here to promote your movie, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced by her own words. Did you? Jackson asked, tilting his head slightly. Because you haven't asked me a single question about the movie. You haven't asked about the story, the other actors, the director, the message we're trying to convey. Instead, you came at me with some half-baked cultural criticism that you clearly haven't thought through. Joy's face was getting redder by the second. I was providing context for the conversation. Context? Jackson's voice was sharp with disbelief. You call attacking my entire career providing context? You call reducing complex performances to stereotypes providing context? That's not context. That's ambush journalism at its worst. I am not ambushing you, Joy said through gritted teeth. Then what do you call it when you invite someone on your show under the pretense of promoting their work, then immediately launch into personal attacks about their career choices? Jackson asked. What do you call it when you clearly haven't done any research about their recent projects, but feel qualified to lecture them about their artistic decisions? Joy slammed her hand on the table, causing everyone in the studio to jump. I don't have to sit here and be talked to like this on my own show. And I don't have to sit here and be disrespected by someone who clearly has no interest in having an actual conversation. Jackson shot back, his own voice rising to match hers. You want to act like the victim now? You started this. You came at me sideways from the first question. I asked legitimate questions about your career, Joy insisted, her voice cracking slightly. Legitimate questions. Jackson's laugh was harsh. You want to know what a legitimate question would have been? How about asking me about the 2 years I spent developing this new film? How about asking me what drew me to this particular story? How about asking me about working with the director or the other cast members? Those are legitimate questions from someone who actually wants to learn something. Joy was visibly shaking now. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. You're twisting everything I said. I'm responding to exactly what you said, Jackson corrected. You accused me of building my career on stereotypes. You suggested I was being irresponsible with my platform. You implied that I've taken the easy path. Those were your words, not mine. Because it's true, Joy blurted out, and immediately looked like she regretted saying it. Jackson leaned back in his chair and stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow more intense. You really believe that, don't you? He said. You really think you understand my career better than I do. You think you understand the choices I've made, the work I've put in, the impact I've tried to have. You think 30 years of dedication to craft is something you can dismiss with a few talking points. I think, Joy said, her voice wavering, that people in your position have a responsibility to do better. Do better than what? Jackson asked. Do better than bringing complex characters to life? Do better than working with talented filmmakers to tell important stories? Do better than using my platform to create opportunities for other actors? What exactly should I have been doing differently? Joy opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked around the table at her co-hosts. But they were all staring down at their own notes, clearly wanting no part of this confrontation. You can't answer that, can you? Jackson observed. Because you don't actually have a solution. You don't have constructive criticism. You just have complaints based on surface-level observations and assumptions. That's not true, Joy said weakly. Then tell me, Jackson challenged. Give me one specific example of how you think I should have handled a role differently. Name one performance, and explain exactly what you would have changed, and why. Show me that you actually understand the work well enough to critique it. Joy's silence was deafening. She shuffled through her cards again, but they clearly weren't going to help her now. That's what I thought, Jackson said, shaking his head. You want to tear down what I've built, but you have no idea what you're tearing down, or what you'd put in its place. I don't have to have all the answers to point out problems, Joy said, but her voice lacked conviction. But you do have to understand what you're talking about if you want to be taken seriously, Jackson replied. You do have to do basic research before you level accusations against someone's life work. You do have to approach these conversations with good faith if you want them to be productive. Joy's composure finally cracked completely. Fine, you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I didn't prepare as well as I should have. But that doesn't give you the right to come on here and lecture me about how to do my job. I'm not lecturing you about how to do your job, Jackson said, his voice calm again. I'm defending myself against unfair attacks. There's a difference. Unfair? Joy's voice was shrill now. Everything I said was based on your actual filmography. Everything you said was based on a shallow misreading of my filmography, Jackson corrected. There's a difference between looking at the surface and actually understanding the depth underneath. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. You know what? I think we're done here. Jackson remained seated, looking up at her with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and resignation. Are we? Because I was actually hoping we might get to talk about the movie I came here to promote. You know, the reason I'm supposed to be here. "I think you've made your point," Joy said, her voice tight. "Have I?" Jackson asked. "Because it seems like you're more interested in ending the conversation than actually listening to what I'm trying to tell you." Joy looked around the studio, clearly realizing that the cameras were still rolling and that this entire exchange was being broadcast. For the first time since the interview began, she seemed to grasp the full scope of what was happening. "We need to go to commercial," she announced, looking toward the production booth. Jackson finally stood up, slowly and deliberately. "Actually, I think I'm done here," he said, beginning to remove his microphone. "I came here in good faith to talk about a project I'm passionate about, and instead I got ambushed by someone who clearly had no interest in having that conversation." "Samuel, please," one of the other hosts finally spoke up. "Maybe we can start over after the break." Jackson shook his head as he handed his microphone to a production assistant. "No, I don't think so. This isn't the kind of show I want to be associated with. This isn't the kind of journalism I want to support." Joy watched in stunned silence as Jackson walked toward the edge of the set. Just before he reached the exit, he turned back one final time. "For what it's worth," he said, addressing Joy directly, "I hope you'll take some time to actually watch the work before you critique it next time. You might be surprised by what you find." And with that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the View set, leaving behind one of the most awkward and intense moments in the show's history. The studio remained frozen for several seconds before Joy finally managed to stammer out, "We'll be right back after this commercial break." So there you have it. One of the most intense television confrontations you'll ever see. What do you think about how Samuel L. Jackson handled Joy Behar's accusations? Was he right to walk off the set, or should he have stayed to finish the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.